have the privilege of being here in Havana, Cuba with David Savona, executive editor of Cigar Aficionado. Of course, Cigar Aficionado back in 1992 was the publication that discovered Trinidad. It was in their pages that the Trinidad brand of cigars being rolled at El Aguito was first written about for the world. David is here on behalf of Cigar Aficionado to share with us some of the stories behind this truly monumental moment in Cuban cigar history. David, thank you so much. It's really hard to believe that something like Trinidad could have remained a secret for so long, and that it was on a chance encounter with Marvin Shanken that it was debuted to the world.
That's true. Trinidad is one of the most mysterious of cigar brands because of its origins. And back in the 1990s, nobody knew about it. As the story goes, Marvin Shanken, who founded Cigar Aficionado, he traveled to Cuba in 1991, and he was on assignment for one of his other magazines, Wine Spectator. Cigar Aficionado didn't exist at the time. And he was doing a cover story called The Allure of Cuban Cigars. And even though many of the people who worked for Wine Spectator at the time weren't truly into cigars and thought it was maybe not the best of ideas, Marvin said, "I love cigars, I'm going to Cuba, this is a cover story, this will be something else." And on that mission of discovery, spending time in Havana and other parts of Cuba, he traveled to cigar factories, he smoked an enormous number of cigars, he met with all kinds of cigar people. And he went to El Aguito, the home of, at the time, the birthplace, of course, of Cohiba cigars. And there was a discovery there of a brand that no one had ever heard of called Trinidad. Flash forward to the first issue of Cigar Aficionado, the debut issue in the autumn of 1992. There's a story. The first issue of the magazine has all kinds of cigar stories, including a story on Cohiba, the most famous of Cuban brands. At the end of that story, there's a little sidebar, very small, taking up maybe one page. It says, Cuba's greatest secret, Trinidad. And there it was to let the world know about Trinidad. In that story, it even said that not only was it a secret to cigar lovers around the world, the brand wasn't sold, you couldn't get it in Havana, you couldn't get it elsewhere in the world. The only way to get that brand at the time, that cigar, was as a gift of Fidel Castro. Castro gave gifts of Cohibas, of course, but when Cohiba became commercialized, he wanted something truly special, something unavailable for extra special gifts, and that was the diplomatic Trinidad. And it was revealed in those pages in that first issue. And then in 1992, the cigar world, of course, knew about Trinidad.
What was the reaction? Here are, cigar aficionados and connoisseurs, who really dedicate themselves to scouring the Cuban cigar market to know everything. And they were learning something for the first time, not of a new brand. They learned of something that had been being rolled at that point for 25 plus years.
Well, of course, you always want what you can't get, right? That's a key part of any desirable element of a product, luxury product experience, you name it. The name is the unicorn. Cigars are unicorns that you really can't get. This is the ultimate of unicorns. So, and again, this is a couple of years before I joined Cigar Aficionado, so I knew this as a reader. And of course now, having dealt with Marvin and read the magazine and being at the magazine for 28 years now, knowing from him, but people wanted it. But of course they couldn't get it. And just to go on to talk about how secretive this brand was, flash forward a couple of years to 1994. Again, Marvin Shanken went down to Havana and had a one-on-one interview with Fidel Castro, who at the time, of course, was the leader of Cuba. And they talked about a great many things, the U.S.-Cuba relations, the embargo, the human rights record of Cuba. It's quite the interview. Marvin asked him about Trinidad during that interview and said, we hear there's a cigar that's only available as a gift from you called Trinidad. And Castro said, I don't know anything about it. So the cigar was so secret that Fidel even denied it in the press. But of course it was real. The cigar became commercialized a couple of years later and became the cigar people wanted to have.
Of course, there's another really important touch point in the history of Trinidad's journey to a commercial brand, and that is the 1994 Dinner of the Century.
That is an important part of the Trinidad history. The Cigar Aficionado's Dinner of the Century, 1994, in Paris. It was the first time that people were able to see and hear about and experience this diplomatic Trinidad. It was a dinner unlike any other. Amazing wines, world-class chefs, a remarkable cuisine, a guest list of who's from all around the world. Pierre Salinger was there telling stories about JFK and Cuba and the Cuban embargo. Rush Limbaugh was there. They sat at the same table, even though they were politically opposed. They were brought together by the love of cigars. All manner of stars. Francis Ford Coppola was there. And of course, this is Marvin R. Shanken bringing this wonderful world of cigar smokers together. The wines were remarkable. Like, 1963, Quinta Noval Nacional Port closed the evening. And they smoked these amazing cigars, among them Trinidad's, the diplomatic Trinidad's, and they presented these things up for auction, which went for amazing prices. Boxes were signed by Castro. It was just a ridiculous amount of entirely amazing cigars among them, and probably first and foremost among them, the Trinidad diplomatic cigar.
And the other cigars at the dinner, what were the other cigars?
Oh, there was an A-sized Cohiba, which has never been sold commercially, you know, a 9.25 inch long, 47 ring gauge or 49 ring gauge. I'm getting my dimensions wrong. Cohiba, amazing smoke.
You know, are these, I mean, the connoisseurs of connoisseurs. I mean, you know, literally a room full of the legends and most important collectors of Cuban tobacco. You know, Cohiba, of course, at that time had existed for 12 years. I mean, having been launched in 1982. It, too, sharing a very exciting kind of mystique in its creation. And something that was always certainly a cigar for collectors. But then with Trinidad sitting next to Cohiba, how was, you know, I mean, how did those in attendance think of the Trinidad?
Again, I wasn't there for this, so it's hard for me to say firsthand. Yeah. But, you know, from what I hear, amazing reception. And of course, looking back upon it, you know, it would be legendary to smoke an A-sized Cohiba made just for the dinner. But even looking at that cigar as an unobtainable, completely unobtainable cigar, I would put the Trinidad, the diplomatic Trinidad, above that in terms of rarity and importance. I can think of probably, I don't know if I can think of another cigar that has the legend, the mystery, and the collectability of a diplomatic Trinidad. Nothing even comes close. A 1492, maybe, but not as good as a diplomatic Trinidad. That's the rarest of the rare. We write about cigar auctions. There used to be a far greater number of them in the 1990s. Christie's used to do a very famous cigar auction. And I remember in, I forget the exact year. It was sometime in the 1990s when a box of Trinidad set the record, an auction price record. It was $450 per cigar, which was an enormously large number at the time. Of course, now it's almost laughable because there are new production cigars that are sniffing that number or going for even more. But at the time, the world went nuts for Trinidad. Collectors went crazy for diplomatic Trinidad. It was unparalleled in its demand by collectors and cigar connoisseurs. In
1994, you had this dinner of the century that really whet the appetite of collectors. But it was a full 4 additional years until Habanos ultimately made the decision to offer Trinidad as the Fundadores to the world. What was that reception like? And how was that cigar received by the community of Cuban connoisseurs?
It's hard to understand now because in today's cigar world, the Habanos S.A., the Cuban cigar industry, new brands are somewhat common. They come out with new brands often. The non-Cuban cigar world, of course, is one of constant new brand launches. Yeah. The Cuban cigar world, less so. But in the 1990s, Cuba didn't introduce new brands. It was a basically locked portfolio. It was very rare for a new Cuban cigar to come out. I think the only one that had come out before Trinidad in many, many years was Cuava. So they made a launch of a brand. That was that was a big deal. First new Cuban brand in so many years. The launch of Trinidad was even greater. It was a matter of incredible importance. It was very, very new. People, of course, knew about the allure of Trinidad. People wanted this cigar. So the launch was a big deal. It was a very big deal. People were excited. The cigar sold very well. And, it wasn't the same cigar as the diplomatic, but it was close. This classic, beautiful size, 7.5 by 40 ring, smokes very, very well. So I'd say it was a hit from the start. And it was a very big deal at the time because it just was fairly rare for Cuba to release new brands.
Yeah. Often Cohiba in many ways could be described as a cigar for collectors, right? Unmatched collectability. But Trinidad has always been a boutique brand. Small number of vitolas when it launched. It was just the Fundadores. It wasn't until 2003 that any additional vitolas were added. And I've always seen Trinidad as a cigar for connoisseurs. Do you share that opinion? And if so, do you have any insight as to what makes Trinidad occupy a special place in the pantheon of Cuban cigars amongst collectors and connoisseurs alike?
I think you're right. I think Trinidad does hold a special place for cigar connoisseurs, and it is maybe more for connoisseurs than many other brands. It is small. It's not made in vast quantities like some of Cuba's bigger brands. I think a lot of it goes back to the original size, the original commercial size, the Fundador. You know, the Lancero size is not one that's immensely popular with the typical consumer. Many consumers like, you know, a Robusto, a Toro, something fatter, something shorter. You know, these slender cigars are really ones that are embraced most passionately by people who smoke a lot of cigars and really know their cigars. You know, with the cigars this slim, you tend to smoke more of the wrapper. You know, there's a certain elegance about the size. It's just a connoisseur's kind of shape. So I think it begins with that. That has a big part of it. I think the mystery of it, going back to the days when you knew about it but you couldn't get it, that's part of it. And then, of course, the small production. I think Trinidad is one more embraced by collectors than the typical brand. Also now, you know, Cuba has elevated Trinidad, raising the price of Trinidad much like they did with Cohiba. So if you look at the price structure of modern day Cubans, you know, it's Cohiba first and foremost, with a close second by Trinidad. So Habanos SII is saying, you know, this is a special cigar. We've elevated it to this position. It's a luxury brand. Cohiba is a mega luxury brand, the king of luxury cigar brands, and they're right close behind it is Trinidad. I think that's fitting.
What is it that you enjoy most about a Trinidad Fundadores?
Oh, that's a great question, Kirby. You know, it's a bit of like a time machine. You know, whenever I smoke one of these, and I don't smoke enough of these Fundadores, when I smoke one, I'm transported back to the late 1990s when this brand first came out. You know, I kind of remember where I was at the time, what I was doing, what the cigar world was like. It was so different back then. I was just a younger guy working at this great magazine, Cigar Aficionado, that I absolutely loved, and I felt very lucky to be there. So, I don't know, I'm transported back to a simpler time, and so for me, it's a little journey back to the glory days of my youth.
Great. Well, David, thank you so much. I mean, it's hard to believe. I mean, it's hard to fully appreciate the magnitude of Cigar Aficionado and all of its contributions to the world of premium tobacco over the last 30 some odd years. I mean, in terms of, of course, promoting premium tobacco, advocating for pro-tobacco legislation, and then, of course, introducing the world to these incredible cigars, not just the Trinidad Fundadores, but through all of your reviews and ratings, helping us, really sort through this incredible universe that is Cuban tobacco and premium tobacco. So thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Kirby, and for the kind words about Cigar Aficionado. We owe it all to Marvin Shanken, who founded the magazine based on a love of cigars. The man loves cigars, and it is the anchor of the magazine. And we're all cigar lovers at Cigar Aficionado, so it's our mission to bring our love of cigars to the readers and collectors of cigars around the world. So we love what we do, and we love when people read it.